Welcome to the ChargePoint podcast, brought to you by FLEXECHARGE, your gateway to the future of EV charging. In each episode, we dive deep into the world of EV infrastructure, offering insights and perspectives from industry leaders, innovators, and the people at the forefront of deploying charging solutions and networks. Join us to explore the exciting developments that are accelerating our world towards sustainable mobility.
Welcome to a new episode of the ChargePoint podcast. My name is Christof and I'm your host. Today, we're diving into a layer of EV charging infrastructure that's often overlooked, but is rapidly becoming one of the main constraints to scale: grid integration. Because as high-power charging networks expand and depot charging expand, especially in markets like Germany and Austria, the challenge is no longer just connecting to the grid. It's how you connect, who you connect to, and under which conditions. We're moving from a relatively standardized system to a fragmented environment with hundreds of DSOs or distribution system operators, each defining their own technical requirements and control interfaces. The consequences are very real: increased engineering complexity, longer approval cycles, and ultimately slower rollout of charging infrastructure. But beyond that, something more fundamental is happening. EV charging sites are no longer just passive loads. They're becoming controllable, grid interactive assets expected to respond to external constraints and signals. So the question is no longer, how do we stay compliant? It's, how do we design charging infrastructure that is natively integrated into the grid? To explore this, I'm joined by Christof, product strategist at FLEXECHARGE, and Nicolas, head of customer success at FLEXECHARGE. We'll break down the technical reality behind grid constraints, the impact on CPO operations, and how to turn this complexity into an advantage. Let's dive in. Today's episode is a bit special as we're recording in the new ChargePoint podcast studio at the FLEXECHARGE's HQ in Copenhagen. Welcome to you, Christof.
Hi.
Welcome to you, Nicolas, online. So we're sitting here with Christof at the office. So before we dive into the interview, I'd like to hear both your origin stories that led you to the position that you have today. So let's start with you, Christof.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Christof. Thanks for having me today. My background story, I studied electrical engineering. That's where I have all the energy knowledge from. And then back in my first internship, actually at a consulting firm, I got dragged into e-mobility and never really left it afterwards. So stayed there in consulting e-mobility for around 9 years, worked along the entire value chain of charging, and then got to Copenhagen and got this amazing job opportunity at FLEXECHARGE, where I now work as a product strategist. Working very closely with business development, sales, marketing to shape our products.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. And you, Nicolas, tell us a bit about your origin story, please.
Gladly, Chris. So I started my career at a battery manufacturer in the residential space, but moved on to software energy management after a few years, which eventually also led me then to join FLEXECHARGE about 2 years ago. Back then, we were just a dozen people making the best of an outstanding technology. And today I'm leading our customer success team. Supporting the scaling of the organization right now.
Thank you. All right, with those introductions in place, let's dive into today's topic. So, Christof, we often hear about grid stress and new grid codes in particular Germany and Austria. So can you explain to our audience what's really happening and why this topic has become so urgent for CPOs?
Yeah, so by grid stress, we actually mean that there's kind of an overload in the distribution grid. It's not about the whole grid, but it's about that on local places, there is too much stress, so meaning an overload, too much power dragging in the grid. And especially like in countries like the Netherlands, where there's a lot of congestion, but also Germany, Austria, where it's getting tighter and tighter, we're running into problems. And the big problem is that we came from a unidirectional grid, big gas and nuclear plants and coal plants, and now we're going into bidirectional energy flows, having e-mobility, having heating, having the industry that is electrifying. There's so many things that's going on, along with more PV and wind generation. And for charging hubs especially, they have the power of small industrial plants nowadays, and that can actually bring the system to a collapse if not regulated, and if not the DSO actively steer how the grid develops. And that's also the reason why there is more and tighter grid constraints. There's more grid codes, because all the system needs to be managed and it needs to be done in a very controlled way. Otherwise, the system will collapse.
All right, very clear. And it seems that the industry is struggling with fragmentation, right? So hundreds of grid operators we hear in Germany, a nightmare, each with their own rules. So how do you see this complexity shaping the EV infrastructure's rollout across Europe, in particular in Germany and Austria?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very big thing for Germany, having plus 800 DSOs. And I mean, there are some unifications going on in the market, but basically what it means for a charge point operator that builds up a charging hub is that you don't know which kind of requirements will be there, because there is a lot of technical requirements, there is law requirements, different things that can change from DSO to DSO. And that means we have a planning uncertainty, and we could potentially run into long approval cycle. I have, for example, seen for a grid connection request something from, okay, you need a letter that needs to be signed and sent to them physically, to having a fully digitalized customer portal. So everything is possible in Germany. And that means two identical charging parts can have two different requirements. And the CPOs need to adapt to that. And the good ones, they have that in control.
Clear. So how does FLEXECHARGE view its role here in helping CPOs navigate these challenges? Are you simply solving compliance, or is there a bigger vision behind this?
Yeah, so compliance is just the starting point. So everybody needs to do that. Without that, you won't operate a charging part, but it's not the ultimate goal. Compliance needs to be there, but it's just the starting point. And it's not the ultimate goal. You could say if you just fulfill all of that, you're kind of playing defense. Mm-hmm. But if you want to go into offense, you need to understand your charging infrastructure differently than how it is done right now. Because charging infrastructure is not just drawing energy from the grid. It is, and it will be, a flexible energy asset which is digitally connected, which has optimized energy flows, and whose portfolio is managed over several sites. And if you understand that, then you also understand that charging parks, let's say 50, 100, 200 sites, have an incredible value for the grid and also for the market.
Okay, so first the defense, otherwise difficult to win, so compliance, but then the offense looking beyond. And we'll come back to that in the vision. But it reminds me also a conversation with Ludwig from Recharge about this virtual power plant project in the fall of 25, where again it is about this evolution of CPOs becoming not just grid strains on the grid or consumers, but they will become energy companies. So that's exactly the vision, right? So we've heard about this plug and play Flexbox, right, to which FLEXECHARGE used recently here in February and rolling out. What was the original idea behind this hardware product for what's usually seen as a software problem?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The initial idea was that charging hubs are always customized engineering projects. And we work with a lot of CPOs that, there's some trenching, cable trenching, there's hardware that needs to be selected, foundations that need to be done. That's all customized. But we ask us, and our CPO customer ask us, where can we actually standardize? And we found the solution within the DSO connection. Of course, there are, especially in Germany, different requirements and different interfaces. We're really talking about analog interfaces, the physical interface in between DSO and charging part that differs. But there are a limited amount of options that are there. And what we've done is we have standardized, we've put all of these options into one box, standardizing and unifying the DSO connection for charge point operator.
Clear, yeah. And by the way, for those listening, want to hear a bit more about the box itself, there's also a webinar which we'll put the link to in the show notes. So for the DSO control grid compliance space is known for being a bit old school, right? And highly technical, highly complex. Some even say that it's a 50-year-old tech. So how does the FLEXECHARGE bring this to the 21st century, Christoph?
Yeah, it's true. Like large parts of the DSO control infrastructure are actually built on legacy concepts. So there is really analog plugs, pins that are still being used in the field. But in the end, it doesn't matter. We are receiving within our FLEXECHARGE these signals, and then we translate from this analog world into, let's say, the 21st century. Mm-hmm. And that's what the FLEXECHARGE does. On one side, we are speaking the language of the grid, which is very secure, reliable, and compliant with the existing DSO control requirements. And on the other side, with our software, we enable real-time, granular, and software-driven optimization on the site level.
I guess that illustrates perfectly this idea of being at the interface between the grid and EV charging, right? Which is a FLEXECHARGE as a fundamental space. Before we continue, a quick note for those of you scaling EV charging in Germany or Austria. If grid control compliance is slowing down your rollouts, you're not alone. With hundreds of grid operators and varying technical requirements, standardization becomes a real challenge. That's exactly why we hosted a webinar on grid operator control and the FLEXECHARGE, breaking down what's changing, why it matters, and how leading CPOs like DSOs are simplifying deployments with a plug-and-play approach. It's available on demand on our website, and you'll find the link in the show notes. All right, let's get back to the episode. Let's talk a bit about some technical points. Let's dive into the products. So Nicolas, from a technical point of view, what exactly does the FLEXECHARGE do? How does it connect with the grid operator and manage local load across the site?
So essentially, the FLEXECHARGE is a load management controller. That's at the core of it. But as Christoph already laid out, the big advantage of the system here is it has all the terminals, all the pin connectors to interface with a local telecontroller provided by the DSO to enforce limits, typically on a temporary basis, which are typically based on a congestion in the grid in that region, onto the charging hub. Now, connecting the dots here, we've got the load management in the system, we've got the signals from the DSO. We ensure that the best possible charging experience is still ensured for the drivers on site. And we can do that by smartly allocating power that is available between the connectors on site, while adhering to the limit that is provided by the DSO. That's at the core, the value. Now, it's not only that though. So I would say a secondary benefit is that we have integrated the components necessary to set up a load management system. I say system because it's typically not just one device. You have a few components that come together, like now it becomes technical as you want it, like a LAN switch to connect your assets, your power meter, your charging stations. Maybe you've got a stationary battery on site. They typically need to be in the same local area network. Now, with the FLEXECHARGE, you have that network architecture in-house. For the installation partner, so CPOs typically work with installation partners. You might know them, like companies like TSG, SPI, or even specialized ones like Charge Construct. They need to set up these systems on behalf of the CPO across the country, and they need systems that are easy to install. It's a replicable process. And that's why we have focused on a plug-and-play system. Every component that you require for the whole thing is inside of the Flexbox.
Clear. So if we look back a bit at the phase up to into now, so you work closely with DSOs, CPOs, maybe installer companies in the region. So what kind of feedback did you get during the testing and deployment? And what did they appreciate most, if you had to say?
So it probably relates to what I just started elaborating on. It's a one-size-fits-all box. All our customer requires is a dedicated space inside of the transformer substation where they can fit the box and then simply plug in the devices that they want to be part of that load management system. So the Ethernet cables leading to the charging station, to the power meter, and so forth. So the plug-and-play functionality is one. Being able to then remotely configure the whole system through our online platform Harmony is a second one, because you can differentiate the process. You can focus on installation on one day and the commissioning and configuration of the system on another day, because the one is done on site and the other can be done remotely from afar. That was one thing. Another huge benefit is that by standardizing the hardware, we allow our CPO customers to roll out across the country with different installers. And it is typically the nature of our industry. So you have regional champions, certain installer groups that drive out to the new charging hub, fit the load management controller, our Flexbox, and that might not be the team that does the next installation the week after. So by heavily standardizing this piece of hardware, we make the whole process of installation more reliable and more easier to manage.
Clear, yeah. So if we look at the customers a bit, and there is some interesting learning from the field that I'd like to hear from you. So you recently helped Electra achieve compliance in Germany on new sites that they're opening. Could you share a bit how that project's unfolded and what challenges they faced at the start, Nicolas?
Yes. So over the course of last year, we've been working with the French headquarters and the team there on a couple of projects where we got to know each other and the challenges that we were facing. And sometimes as things go, one thing led to another. We got introduced to the German subsidiary quite on short notice in November last year, because they had a couple of sites where the DSO sent in requirements quite late that they needed to ensure an interface to the telecontroller, like we talked about before. It's the case sometimes that those technical requirements get adjusted and updated, and then while you are in the process of actually rolling out, you at a late stage in your projects get a new requirement in. And that was the case in November for 2 locations in East Germany. Now, the challenge was the transformers were already on site, the charging stations were already set up, and while Electra was eyeing on a commissioning date before Christmas, having that new requirement actually made it close to impossible. We did, however, have an existing relationship with the team, and we introduced them to our Flexbox as a potential solution. And then within 4 weeks, we produced the devices. We checked the requirements for these 2 sites, which were, by the way, or are right now in different grid regions. So from the start, we had the situation that while both would be, I think, within 100 kilometers from each other, we had 2 different DSOs to deal with. Typical. Nonetheless, we were able to sort the requirements within those 4 weeks, produce the Flexbox and ship it to site. And together with Electra's installation partner, we were able to commission them before Christmas. So meeting the timelines that were set out by our partner.
Quick turnaround, yeah. So if we expand a bit on the market perspective that you have, so what are the most common pain points you hear from CPOs who are trying to connect to local grid operators, and how does this solution change their daily operation?
Yeah. We heard about hundreds. I think the actual number is somewhere between 850 and 900 DSOs in Germany. So it's a fluctuating number, by the way. So we typically say more than 800, and the sheer number of so many potential technical requirements is already a huge headache for most CPOs operating across the country, because with every new project, you fear a new requirement that you have not heard of. Now, that's number one. I think we all are challenged with complexity, and that is just inherently complex. The second one is something I mentioned before. You work with different installation partners, different installation crews. So how can you support them the best way with the choice of your technology stack to meet those requirements? Let's say until a product like the Flexbox finds its way into a tech stack, that is one of the biggest problems you have in organizing the projects. And then, as I mentioned before, the need for a local network. Next to your load management, you also need to set up a local area network with a switch, with a router, and all of that. And that can be quite a stressful commissioning process. Like I sometimes joke with new customers in pilot projects or first sites commissioned. They ask like, what can I expect in terms of installation time? I'm like, hey, installation is typically done in 20 minutes. But just be ready for 3.5 hours of network issues, and then we can focus on 20 minutes configuring the load management. One of these days, we wanted to find a solution for this kind of setup, and we found it with the Flexbox. So having a one size fits all networking, load management, and DSO interface cabinet is basically meeting those pain points.
Clear. So, Christoph, so looking at customers like Electra, what do their experiences tell us or tell you about the evolution of the CPO market in Germany, Austria, and the DACH region, right? Do you see some kind of a shift toward grid interactive sites as the new normal?
Grid interactive. Yes. But grid interactive is just the first step. So, what we're doing with the Flexbox and with our system is that we're standardizing the DSO connection. What does it mean? There's no headache for the CPO anymore. What it also means is that the DSO, and that is actually required by grid codes, has more impact and influence on what happens on the site. So if the DSO says, okay, now reduce to 60%, we comply. But what does it actually mean? We also get the capabilities on the sites to reduce when there are other signals, not just the DSO, but signal from the energy market, signal from flexibility markets. So what we're actually doing with that, we are also enabling the customers to participate in the energy market. And this is something that we will see in the future more and more. CPOs will become active participant in the energy market, either by themselves or via third parties.
Right, and that's what covers when you talk about unlocking flexibility.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, clear. Looking ahead, Nicolas, how do you see the technology evolving? Will future versions of the Flexbox also integrate other elements, other assets that are not yet integrated?
Yes. So, from the assets that we typically see on charging hubs, we can already control stationary batteries even before we launch the Flexbox. Nonetheless, we expect to see way more of that in the near future. Then we are working on a more advanced integration of solar systems, so PV solar systems, specifically for use cases like solar curtailment. So again, in the context of DSO interaction, there are certain requirements for larger PV solar systems to not feed in too much power into the grid. That is something we are now working on and prepare to launch towards the second half of the year. And then you can, of course, expect, since this is our very initial launch version, there will be some general improvements on the design. So I believe we have achieved a really good spatial efficiency with our cabinet. When we talked about transformer substations before, there is only little space typically left for additional components, which is why the pressure is on additional systems like ours to be as space efficient as possible. So there will probably be some adjustments at some point.
Noted.
Yeah, I would say.
We'll follow up on that. Absolutely. Solar makes a lot of sense given the wider deployment of solar energy we all know about in Germany, right? So, Christoph, back to you. So, what does this mean for the future of EV charging ecosystem, right? Are we heading toward a world where CPO becomes active participants in energy markets, as I was a bit alluding earlier? Do you share that vision?
Yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit already about it. We are clearly moving toward a more integrated energy and mobility ecosystem. I mean, as the grid becomes more constrained, as there's more and more renewables, CPOs will no longer be able to just operate as pure charging stations providers. They will need to actively manage loads, optimize energy, integrate storage, have renewables maybe, and then provide flexibility to the market. And in that sense, many CPOs are actually moving closer to becoming energy market participants. The actual question is, how far can they go? So do they always partner up? Do they do it themselves? That will be one of the very interesting questions. And I mean, the energy companies that are also CPOs have a natural advantage there. And then the pure charging operation station companies, but we'll see. That is one question that will be answered in the next years.
Yeah, they all have, depending on where they come from, different advantages or drawbacks. The energy retailers, oil and gas have great locations, but they tap into a new type of business, and the others have the experience, but they don't maybe have the location. So interesting to see how they all leverage those strengths. And finally, Christoph, if you had to summarize in one sentence, what does the Flexbox represent for the industry?
I think the easiest is to quote our slogan there. And that is one box for on-site asset networking, local load and energy management, and of course, DSO integration.
Yeah. And as a journalist here, I would say it represents this bridge between the legacy and the future, and the connection between the analog and the digital, and this interface between the grid and EV charging. On that final note, Nicolas, thank you for joining from Munich. Christoph, thanks for being in the Charge Podcast studio, and wishing you a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
So what should we take away from this conversation? Well, first, grid integration is no longer a side topic. It's becoming the structural constraint for scaling EV charging, especially in fragmented markets like Germany and Austria. We're not dealing with a single grid anymore. We're dealing with hundreds of operators, each with their own requirements, and that fundamentally changes how CPOs need to design and deploy their infrastructure. Second, this is critical for any CPO looking to scale. Standardization is becoming a competitive advantage. Because without it, every site turns into a custom engineering project with more complexity, more delays, and less predictability. What solutions like the Flexbox bring is exactly that, a way to standardize deployment across very different grid environments, reducing integration efforts, simplifying rollout, and making operations truly scalable. Third, compliance is just the baseline. If you stop there, you're kind of playing defense. The real opportunity is to design charging sites as flexible, controllable energy assets, able to adapt to grid constraints and, over time, interact with energy markets. Because EV charging is evolving from a pure infrastructure play, you could say, to a core component of a much broader integrated energy system. And that raises important questions for the years ahead, like who will capture the value of flexibility? How far will CPOs go into becoming energy players? and which technology stacks will enable that transition at scale. One thing is clear, the winners won't be just the fastest to deploy, but the ones who can deploy at scale with consistency and in sync with their grid. Thanks again to Christophe and Nicolas for sharing their insights today. It was a pleasure having you. And to everyone listening, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure, as always, to follow the podcast, get notification, give us a 5-star rating, or leave a nice quick review. It really helps to reach more people in the industry. See you in the next episode. Take care.